doesn't mean I don't want to see improvement for that kid. And so even the kid who's like on grade level, even the kid who's ahead of grade level, I think public education owes that kid improvement as well. And the question is improvement in what? And the what is what they know or are able to do. So when we say student outcomes, our definition of student outcomes are measurable evidence of what students know or are able to do at the end of the cycle. And so, yeah, that's absolutely what we're suggesting, is that school systems exist for one reason only, to cause improvements in what students know and are able to do so they can live a choice-filled life, a life where they can meet the needs of themselves, their community, and their loved ones. This is why school systems exist. And all of the things that we do are important, but they're not the reason we exist. So if we have perfect buildings, but none of the kids can read, did the school system do its job? No. If we have all perfectly happy teachers, but none of the kids can do basic math, have we done our job? And so it's the job of the board to figure out which knowledge and skills we're going to focus on, which student outcomes we're going to focus on first in sequence. But that's the mission. And the board that forgets that that's the mission is a board that begins to leave your most vulnerable children behind. Because the children who already have all the privilege, all the resources, all the access to extracurriculars outside of school, their families are going to cover all that. Those kids are probably going to be okay if we just keep them 100. The kids who, if the board does a mediocre job, it's the kids who are already most educationally vulnerable, who are already furthest from educational justice. Those are the children who are disproportionately harmed by the board's mediocrity. Like, those children require greatness of their school board, a board that cannot be dissuaded, cannot be persuaded away from a focus on student outcomes, because that board knows what's at stake. And so just to be clear, embedded in this is a certainty that not all children are equally harmed by a board's failure to stay focused on the things that matter most. That the harm that comes from that is disproportionately burdened and borne on the shoulders of their children who are already furthest from education and justice. So before we go into the next section, why would we start a conversation about policy with this? Why does this document start with that as the opener if this is supposed to be about policy? Why are we even having this conversation? Anyway.
I think policy is a perfect example of where we can get lost in the weeds as a board, because there's so many of them. There's so many conflicting priorities and inputs involved and encompassed by policy that if we're not very clear on what our focus is, we could just get focused on something that is not our lane.
Look, I have watched school boards toil endlessly, month after month after month, every single month, diligently picking up one particular policy in their manual of 1,000 pages, wordsmithing that ad nauseum. At the end of a 3-hour meeting, having changed one semicolon and 2 prepositions, and they go home thinking they did their job. I'm telling you, folks, students were not served by that. Students were not served by that. It is very possible that you could dive into policy. It is a unending pool. You could swim in those waters all day, every day, and not actually get anywhere. And you've got to stay focused on why school systems exist, why school boards exist, or you lose track of the main thing. Anybody else? Why are we talking about why school systems exist and why school boards exist in advance of public policy? Anybody else before we transition?
Doesn't policy also offer a possibility for room for improvement? Like, if your policy is in place, but it's not really serving the purpose for the student, can that be like written and then maybe serve the purpose that is supposed to be serving from the beginning, to be able to make changes?
We are going to come to this exact point that you just raised. The point that you raised is spot on, and we're going to address that when we get to the part where we talk about really monitoring policy, but specific to your point, reviewing policy.
Yeah.
So what often happens is we don't make the main thing the main thing. We kind of cut off in whatever is interesting on social media or whatever the chatbot said this week. And we write that down, we put it in policy, and then we move on to the next thing that social media says do. And we never come back and review, was this even worthwhile to begin with? Well, fast forward 30 years, my guess is there's probably policies in your manual ain't nobody in that organization read. They're there, and they're not actually serving kids, they're actually serving anybody, but they're there. They've been forgotten about. But they are creating a tax on the organization that we'll talk about. There is a tax from having a bunch of policy laying around that isn't actually monitored, that isn't actually reviewed. So yeah, absolutely, the point that you're making is well made. That if we're not being responsible owners of policy, and part of ownership means you have to monitor it and you have to review it from that time, then we can actually do a net harm to the school system when we intend doing that positive. Take a moment, read the next section. It describes why does policy exist. So we talked about why the school system exists, why school boards exist. Now take a moment, read a section about why does policy exist. Then we'll talk about it. What jumped out at you about this section? Anybody?
For me, it was the part about it needing to be regularly monitored for implementation and review for relevance. Because that seems like that's a part that's often left out, and it's really important, and there's really no point in policy if that's not a part.
Yeah, without that pretending to lead through policy, but we're not actually leading through policy. Anybody else, what jumped out at you about why policy exists?
So, from a standpoint of the law, this is one of the areas that school committees in this state are required. This is one of their work areas. This is one of the 3 things they do. They maintain a balanced budget. They hire and
Fire the
oversee,
superintendent.
hired over, support or
Yeah,
monitor the
policy.
superintendent, and then they adopt policy. But as we discussed, AJ, they adopt and then they delegate in the same set of rules under the state law. They're told adopt and then delegate everything you think you can delegate. And it's an explicit directive to delegate. So a lot of the state policies that we're supposed to have, that I started to compile a list, are really, it's okay for the school board to adopt those policies through the delegation function to the superintendent. I mean, I was just looking at a few of them. We have to have a student discipline code. School committees shall adopt and enforce a student discipline code. That can be done and often is done through the superintendent and his or her staff. because they're the ones who are enforcing it and making it live on the ground every day with the kids in the building.
Absolutely. And in that moment, the board has selected delegation as its means of implementation.
Yep.
There are some things where the board says, we, the board members, will actually do this work ourselves.
Right.
There's something where the board delegates the task to the board.
To the
But
super.
there are some things where the board delegates the task to the board.
Oh.
And then there are some things where the board delegates the task to the superintendent. And so anything the board is going to delegate to itself, it is actually saying, we are going to own this. Anything that the board is delegating to the superintendent, say, we're not going to own this. And then instead, we're going to have superintendent actually perform the task of ownership. And I think of ownership of policies the same way I think about the ownership of a car. Do people drive their own cars and rental cars the exact same way?
Yeah, that.
Nah.
We take care of yours and not the rentals. I would say that's a bad question for me because I'm a equal opportunity shitty driver, so it really doesn't. Wrong question.
Yeah, but I watch people who be super conscientious and real careful of their car. Yeah, let them get a rental. They out here doing donuts. Right. They out here doing some Tokyo drift.
That's because it's registered, AJ.
And it comes back to us. As long as our car get back together, that's fine.
No, people be treating hotel rooms differently than their own bedrooms.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Talk about oops. Be a whole lot more careful in your own house. People treat things that they don't own differently than things they own. And boards are no different. When boards say we're gonna own this, they treat it differently. When the board's like, yeah, we ain't gonna own this, we're gonna pass this on down the road. And so with that in mind, this just seems to be a fundamental norm of human behavior, is that we treat things that we own differently than things that we don't own. But all that means is we gotta be thoughtful about, okay, so which things are we actually gonna own? And because we will put in the time to do right by them. And which things are we not gonna own? But then let's not pretend to own. Let's head off to somebody who will treat it with ownership level care and attention. That's all we're suggesting, is that the policy is the same way. Is that you want policy to be owned by whoever's gonna act like an owner. If you're gonna so-called own it, but then treat it like you rented it, then probably hand it to somebody who is actually gonna treat it like they own it. That is what we're suggesting here.
I also think about like I consider myself a minimalist. Like with my clothing and stuff, I wear the same colors.
Okay.
I wear the same colors all the time.
Look, y'all ain't never see me in a different outfit than one.
No, yeah, I have, even with my kids, I buy the same color socks, so I ain't gotta match them. Like I try to make things extremely streamlined. And I think about this with closets a lot of times, because I wasn't always that way. I think about this idea kind of like with policy, where when you have a closet that's full of clothes that you haven't gone through in a while.
I go a closet.
Right. See, exactly. It's all on the same
God.
When you have a closet that's like overflowing with clothes, you give yourself an illusion that you have a lot of clothes. Do you know what I'm saying? You give yourself this illusion that you have a lot, and then therefore when you need new things, you don't buy them, you don't fix them, because you're giving yourself the illusion that you have a lot. Versus if you have, say, 10 shirts and you take really good care of those shirts, and then you have like a system where if I buy something, I give something away, buy it, give away, buy it, give away. I think about that with policy too, where it's like if you have 300 policies, it's like, oh, we're doing our job. And it's like, no, you just have a bunch of old dusty shirts in your closet that you don't even wear. You outgrew them.
You don't even wear it.
You don't even wear them. And so I think about that with the review and the monitor kind of stuff, like less is more. here, just make them effective, make them good, and be able to have the capacity to review them, so you don't just have like a closet full of policies that, it's weird.
There are pros and cons, to what you're describing. It's important to be clear about the pros and cons. So what are the benefits to the board of having 1,000 pages of policy? There are benefits, otherwise boards wouldn't do it. What are the benefits to the board of having 1,000 pages of policy?
Definitely we're covering, yeah.
Well, I mean,
You get to look like you're covered. If somebody asks, hey, you have a policy about this? Yes, ma'am, we do. I don't know what it is, I ain't read it, everybody here ever read it, it was adopted in 1932, but yes, ma'am, we do. So you get to, there is some potential legal coverage. If the judge asks, was there a policy for that? Then the board like, oh yeah, we have a policy, this is somebody else's problem. So that's a benefit, and I want to be clear that is in fact a real benefit of having 1,000 pages. Is it allows the board to kind of pass the buck, I haven't read it, but I know it's out there, so somebody should have read it, so it's not my fault.
But I wanna interject something that is not contrary to what you're saying, but relevant. The other purpose of policy is not simply to just carry out some of the board's work. If it's done well, it's supposed to, whether it's adopted by the board and owned by the board or delegated, it's supposed to provide user-friendly rules that are transparent to the community, that the community can access so it knows what to do. An example, we have to have a Title IX policy as a matter of law. Why? Because the regulations say so. Why? Because if a student believes herself to be sexually harassed, she has to have an accessible, clear, transparent way to know what to do. That's the point. So that she, and I'm using she, it could be he, it could be they, know, okay, I know who to go to if I feel like teacher X is saying something inappropriate. Now, that doesn't mean it's the board's ownership, but it is a set of rules that govern the school district that isn't just to make the judge say you're doing a good job, but to potentially provide a script for someone who feels that they need to take some action. I mean, that's a little legally aspirational, but
Oh, no, you're absolutely, can you all still hear me?
Yeah.
It's absolutely the case that there is a benefit to having rules and processes and procedures written down. There's no question that's the case. That's 100% true, is that you want these things written down. And there is a huge net benefit to the community, to your stakeholders, and so on, of having it written down. That's not in question. What is in question is who owns what is written down. And sometimes who owns what is written down is, as you just read a moment ago, dictated by law. And sometimes it's not. But either way, the board needs to figure out who's actually going to own the things here. Is it going to be us, or is it something that we're going to delegate ownership of to someone else who is actually going to do the duties that coincide with ownership? But is there a benefit to having things written down? Yes. And frankly, you all are probably, like most districts, currently violating that benefit. That where a lot of the rules and norms of the school system are probably written down somewhere, but not very publicly accessible.
Correct.
And part of this conversation speaks to that. Part of policy review speaks to, okay, so the policy that the board chooses to own needs to be very visible, but the policy that the board chooses not to own, that it chooses to delegate,
We've lost you.
also needs to be very visible. And so all of that is going to come out in this process. And often what happens, I've worked with another district that's at the tail end of this, they realize is there's the majority of what passes as policy in their district wasn't actually viewable or findable online in any way, shape, or form because it was hidden in various offices, the central office, and they realized, okay, this actually isn't accomplishing, like, it's not for us to own, like, as the board, we don't want to own what is the exact, type of pencil that is purchased, for this, that, the other, we don't care about that. But that should be known, and it should be publicly accessible, so the parents can find that, so they can buy the right type of pencil if they care to. And so the ownership part is huge. But that doesn't dilute, like, we would argue that it doesn't matter who owns it, that if it is, the effective policy of the school system, that it does need to be publicly available in some way.
Easily
Yeah, without,
struggle.
without having to, dive through 500 pages of website, and without having to be cousins with somebody who works for central office who can get you access to a file vault or something like that. Anybody else, reflections on this document, this section of the document talks about why policy exists. Anything else jump out at you before we move on to the next section?
Just that I've been on policy since February, and I think all we've done, granted, we've only had a few meetings, but all we've done is review policy. Like we all like wordsmith, kind of like look through things, and it's just it's like, oh, okay, so there's actually another part, that monitoring part, that is probably more important than reviewing policy every month. That we need to
Yeah, any policy that is not monitored at least once per year isn't really being owned. Any policy that's not monitored at least once per year isn't really being owned. And any policy that isn't being reviewed at least once, per the term of, a board member. So in your case, I think your terms are 4 years, is that accurate?
Some two.
It staggers at least
3, 2, or 1.
But ultimately, they're supposed to be how long?
3. I think it's
They're supposed to be 3 years?
yeah.
Then any policies that aren't reviewed, for relevance at least once every 3 years, are really policies that are being owned. They're being treated like, the car that we're out here, trying to drift in and do donuts in. Like, this is not how we would treat something we own. If it was something we own, we would check up on it from time to time to see, how is it? Is it in good shape? Is it, but we also, how is it? Or is it actually being used? Is it actually being implemented? We'd ask questions about review and monitoring if we own something. A policy that is not reviewed at least once every term of the board member, and policy that is not monitored at least once per year, this policy that isn't really being owned. We're pretending we're owning it, but we're not really owning it. And our argument is, if you're not going to own it, that's fine. Then delegate it to someone who will.
AJ, can you maybe you're gonna get to this, so ignore me if you are, but could you maybe like break down the difference between review and monitor? Like what is the sort of nuance between those?
Yeah, this is really important. So monitoring policy is a process of saying, is this policy being implemented? So if we have a policy, you brought up a policy about student code of conduct. Simple question, are we actually enforcing a student code of conduct? Like, as it currently exists, are we implementing what is currently on paper right now? That is a question that monitoring is asking. It's like, does reality match what we've written down? That's the question of monitoring. The question of reviewing is actually looking at what's on paper and saying, is this still the right thing that should be on paper? So monitoring, we're not really asking, is this the right thing? We're asking, is the thing that we have now, is it actually being done? With reviewing, we're stopping. This is why it's a longer term in between reviews, is we're asking the question, is this the thing that should still be on paper? Or is this something that's outdated? Like, if you have a policy that says, the school board won't allow cassette tapes, to be played in classrooms. Like, that probably needs to be reviewed a little bit. Because I assure you it's not being monitored. Ain't nobody looking for cassette tapes. But it probably needs to be reviewed and said, okay, wait a minute, is this even still relevant? And no, it's not. So either we need to get rid of it or we need to update it to the version of something that would be relevant.
Thank you.
Does that explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, it does, thank you. I guess I'm just wondering also with the review, and I guess it depends on the policy, what level of like data we wanna be collecting. Like, I'm thinking about just student impacts. What's coming to mind is like behavioral, policy around behavior consequences and stuff like that. Like, is there, yeah, I guess the question is like, how much are we digging into like how a policy is like impacting students? Which then kind of triggers a review, or is that something that's part of that process?
Yeah, that is a fundamental curiosity about a review. Is this actually relevant? Is this actually doing anything useful? Or do we have people busy doing stuff, but it's not actually making a difference? So at which point it's still using district resources. Like that's the problem. Like if we say, hey, well, we have a policy that we should go and count the number of blades of grass in the front yard of every school. Okay, great. The question is any child actually benefited by the counting of blades of grass in front of the school? Then why are we doing it? The question of monitoring says, when's the last time we counted the grass and how much grass was there? The question of review is, should we be counting the grass?
I mean, an example that Paula brought up is the state mandate to have a policy prescribing bullying. And the school committee, either directly or through delegation, and most school committees do it just directly, has to have an anti-bullying policy. And as part of that anti-bullying policy, the school committee also has to have a set of procedures in place for reporting bullying and adjudicating it and deciding if it's real, not real, substantiated, not substantiated. And then thirdly, as a matter of state law, the school committee is supposed to receive a report twice a year from the administration on where bullying is taking place, how many cases, and in what schools. So there are many tiers of participation that the school committee or board can be in that case, much of it mandated, but the policy is the simple part. It's the monitoring of how it's being implemented that's actually the work. And that might be an example where the board wants to own it and monitor it because they have to do it anyway. We're supposed to.
Yeah, I mean, but one distinction here is with anti-bullying, we certainly don't expect school board members to go out to the schools and be walking through classroom to classroom. Hey, is there bullying happening over here? Hey, Rebecca, have you been bullied today? Like, and so we don't actually expect board members to own that policy. They're not actually doing the monitoring work. They're not really checking it for relevance. And so if the board's going to, then do it. If the board's not going to, they would say, just be explicit about delegating.
So they could delegate the implementation and still receive a report as to what's going on.
Yes, but then that report, if the board's not really owning it itself, it is owning the piece of it that is legally mandated to own, but it's not really performing the acts of an owner, then we would say absolutely get that report. That sounds like something great to be emailed home on a Friday night. It does not sound like something great to spend time on a board meeting.
Right, I get it.
The next section actually just kind of digs deeper into the same topic. And then the next section of the document looks at what are examples of when the board is being ineffective in leading through policy, which is basically a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here. There are 5 key ways the board is ineffective. The first, it adopts so many policies that there's just no clear sense of priority. The board's got 1,000 pages of policy. You can't tell me which of those is a higher priority than the other. And that becomes a problem. It's just hard to lead when you can't tell people what the priorities are. The next major area of ineffective policy leadership is they just fail to monitor. we've talked about that. The next area is a failed to review, policy in a timely fashion, we talked about that. The next two, however, are different, we haven't really dug into. So take a look at, number 4 and number 5, and then we'll talk about it. What jumped out at you about these last two areas of policy leadership failure? What jumped out at you?
I think for me, it's more of a question that I'm asking myself, is like, how do we know which policies are within our expertise? Like, if we looked at all of our policies, which ones are sort of like hashtag vision and values versus which ones are like inputs outside of our expertise? I don't have an answer to that, but it's just, yeah, it's just more like an awareness of like, oh yeah, like how do we even distinguish the difference between the ones we already have?
Fortunately, we will literally talk about that next. Who else? What jumped out at you of these last two areas of ineffective policy leadership?
Well, I see number 5 as being the rule, that there are policies on finance, policies on special education, policies, and they're not really policies, they're mostly recitations of the law with a few sprinkling of protocols, and they're implemented, monitored, and the responsibility of the finance educators and special educators in every school district. They're the ones in charge of it. And that's where the multiplication of policies starts to happen. It's all this administrative stuff that gets elevated falsely to the board.
Any other reflections? So the board is an expert, but it's important to be clear about what the board is an expert in and what the board is not an expert in. And expertise matters. Like sometimes we want to pretend that it doesn't. But when the chips are down, we all understand innately that expertise matters. Like, you love your child. You love your child. But if your child is having a heart condition, do you want to fix that yourself? Do you want to take it to a cardiologist? In that moment, when it really matters, you understand, you care about expertise. What you want to do is you want to delegate the jobs to the people with the most expertise in that area. And so the board does in fact have expertise, and the board should lean in and rely heavily on that expertise and should stand up and lead in the areas for which the board is the expert. But should also be mindful not to try to do that in areas where it's not the expert, where a cardiologist is needed. This is the core message that items 4 and 5 are lifting up, is that expertise matters when the results matter. If the results are, I need my child educated, then we need to figure out who has the most expertise in various areas and apply that expertise. Expertise matters when my kid's not feeling well. I need to figure out who has the most expertise and make sure that I'm calling them into action to deploy their expertise. That's what this is arguing. But it does go to your point of, okay, so what is the expertise of the board? To have clarity about what the expertise of the board is, what are the things that the board and the board alone can uniquely answer? Go ahead and literally read the very next section, demonstrating effective policy leadership. And this is probably the single most important section that we're going to read tonight. It's a little bit longer than the others, but take a moment and read this next section. Section labeled demonstrating effective policy leadership. And it effectively ends with 4 bullets. Go ahead and read that section now. As you're reading about these 4 areas for which the board and the board alone has expertise, what's coming up for you?
I'm just trying to think of the policies we have and trying to see if they fall under, like, I'm getting overwhelmed with thinking about revamping our policies, that's all. Like, that's what I keep thinking.
I think for me, reading this simplified it a lot, which is almost so simple that I'm like, oh, really? Really? So what else do we do? And especially because we're concluding the community listening sessions, I'm like, all right, that's 1 and 2 right there, goals and guardrails, we're on our way to developing that. So I'm like, we're already doing this work. And so I guess the realization is that, yeah, we can definitely figure those out, and then the other 2, that feels manageable, I guess. But yeah, then what do we do with the other ones, I guess?
Yeah, what you start to realize is that the vast majority of policies in your current policy manual falls outside of the expertise of the board. It's not actually one of these 4 areas at all. It falls into the area of expertise of your administration. Now, sometimes, as your attorney pointed out, you are legally required to adopt it, even if it's not your area of expertise. In those moments, our coaching would be follow the law, but rely heavily on people who are experts to help you sort through this and identify what is the appropriate policy that is a match to the vision and values of the community. In that moment, you're not really evaluating the policy on its technical merits because you're not the technicians, you're not the content area of experts, but you are evaluating, because law requires you to do so, on its alignment with the community's vision and values. It's actually the same way with the budget. The budget is not actually a governance document. The budget is a management document. The budget doesn't actually do anything. The budget tells you, here's what we think we're going to do. But pop quiz, how many times does the board modify its budget in a year? The correct answer is usually a bunch. It's the budget. There's nothing sacred or magical about a budget. It's actually a management document that says, here's how we think we'll spend the money. But most legislatures have said, we want the board, the elected officials, to be the public officials. We want them to have the final say on the budget. And so they've arranged things where the board has to vote on it. That doesn't actually make it a governance document. It makes it a management document that is receiving a governance review. And the review for governance is, does what is in this document match the vision and values of the community? So it's not actually the board is looking at the budget and saying, hey, I think you should budget this way. Well, hold on, why are we doing accrual accounting? I think we should be doing cash accounting. Why aren't we using QuickBooks? Like, none of that is what the board is doing when it's looking at the budget. What the board is doing is providing a governance review. Does this match the vision and values of the community? Of a management document. And the only reason the board is providing a governance review of a management document is because the law says you have to. Same thing with the example given a moment ago. Code of conduct, student code of conduct. Most days, I would not think of that as a governance document. I think of that as a management document, because I expect the staff to be managing student behavior on a day-to-day basis. However, the state says they want that to have a governance review by the public officials. And so you all are obligated to do so by voting. But when you're voting, you're not giving the technical review and saying, hey, I disagree with this approach to discipline, or I think instead of swatting 5 times, we should swat children 10 times. That's a Texas joke. Swatting is still legal here. I don't think it's legal in Rhode Island.
It isn't legal. It isn't. Although it was 20 years ago.
Well, it is very much still legal today across the great state of Texas and is used in many, many school districts.
Nice.
But in that moment, the board is not being asked to provide a technical review because the board are not the technicians, you're not the technical experts in this area. The board, by law, is being mandated to provide a governance review. And what you're saying, does this match the vision and values of the community? Now, you can't really answer that question if you don't have goals and guardrails. So right now, you all have no way of really doing your job in that regard. But once you have goals and guardrails, then you have something to evaluate the budget against, and evaluate the code of conduct against, and evaluate everything else against that the state says you legally have to weigh in on. But in those moments, the ownership still lies with staff. State law, however, has required that staff submit to a governance review of their work. That's the way to think about these things. The board only has expertise in representing the vision by community. That is it. That is the board's expertise, and nobody else has that expertise. Superintendent doesn't have it. Regarding the school system, the mayor doesn't have it. The mayor was not selected to represent the vision, values, and community as it relates to the public school system. The board and the board alone has that expertise, has that task. Other reflections on this section, or Cindy, if there's anything I'm missing, jump in. So as you pointed out, and the board is already working on two areas of this, goals and guardrails. So let's take a moment and dig quickly into the second two. Any questions about delegation or governance?
Can you give an example of like what a policy would be that like shows the board relationship and processes with community? I'm having a hard time like thinking of what kind of policy that would be.
Cindy, you want to play?
Sure, it would be something around, like the board will engage in two-way communication with the community to report progress on goals and guardrails at least 2 times per year.
Oh, okay, got it.
Something like that, yeah. There might also be one around how the board will engage with community during, or not engage with them during board meetings, or how the board might respond to community concerns.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Could it also script how the board interacts within itself? There was a training conversation we had some time ago about how to mediate issues that may arise within the board. Wasn't that a policy? You provided an example of a policy or a script with ideas about an internal governance document. How do we handle conflicts? Is that an example of that kind of policy?
Yeah, that would be with how the board's relationship with itself, and that would be something around board member concerns with board member performance. For example, if there is a concern, take it to, first speak with the board member. Second, if that's not resolved, next take it to the chair. And all the way, a series of steps, but taking it from the most personal to, and then stepping it up to full board if necessary, but hopefully with the hope that it would get resolved just between the 2 board members.
So a code of conduct policy for the board. Right.
Yeah.
Sydney, would you be able to
Yep,
give some examples?
Absolutely.
Can you hear me, Sydney?
Yep.
Can you give me some examples on board relationships with staff who report directly to the board?
Yeah, so that would be policies around delegation, delegation of implementation of your goals and guardrails, for example. It would be policies around how you are going to evaluate that person's performance. Those types of things would fit under that. Also, you asked about relationship between the board and staff that reports to the board. Was that the question? Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. And these are some of the things, these governing policies, the board's relationship with itself, the board's relationship with the community will be some of the recommendations that I'll have for you based on, or that the team is putting together based on some of the information gleaned from the interviews that you all did.
Excuse myself. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Next one.
Yeah, next time.
Bye.
Other questions or reflections about these 4 areas of board expertise: the goals, the community's vision, guardrails, the community's values, delegation, board's relationship with its direct reports, and governance, the board's relationship with itself, with its members, and with its community. Other questions or reflections about these 4 areas of expertise of the board and the board has?
I don't wanna jump ahead on the like how so much, but the policy manual, like the thing, the physical thing, I think helps me wrap my head around it a little bit. Like, do y'all have you seen how other districts have done this well in terms of like how they design something that is like very explicit to what the board policy is and how are they transparent about where other policies live in terms of administrative or like management documents? I'm just thinking about, visually, how do we, prepare for, wrap our heads around what is ours to literally pull, and how do we demonstrate to ourselves and others where other policies kind of live?
Yeah, probably the most common thing that I see is that the board is simply shifting the line between itself and its staff. And so right now, the line is where we're here, and all of the policy lives out here. And staff kind of authority lives in this small little chunk that's left over. In the comprehensive policy review, what I really see happening is the board shifting the line and saying, actually, we as a board are gonna own this stuff. We're gonna delegate to the superintendent to own all of this stuff. And so we're just not gonna own it anymore. What that looks like in practice is any number of things. Probably the most common thing I've seen is where that 1,000-page policy manual didn't actually change much, changed a little bit, but didn't actually change much. What the board essentially said, superintendent, this is yours. We're gonna create our own board policy manual. It is just going to have these 4 categories. There's gonna be a standalone document, a PDF. People go on the website and say board policy manual and say superintendent or administrative or management policy manual. And the 1,000-page one will basically stay exactly the way it is today. But who owns it will be different. And then the board will have its own policy manual that says, here's the stuff that we actually own. Here's the stuff that the board is delegated to the board. That's in our manual. Stuff the board is delegated to the superintendent. That's in this other manual where all the stuff is that you normally say. And then you just have to tell the superintendent, your manual can never contradict that. Ours is always the right manual for the board. And so if there's something in your manual that contradicts with their manual, your manual is wrong, and you have an obligation, proactive obligation to immediately fix it. That's the most common way I see districts take on this particular approach. Is just by simply handing wholesale the existing policy manual and then going and identifying what are specific policies within that we're going to retain ownership of, and then pull those into your own manual.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question on that, AJ? I did a little sleuthing, and it looks like Boston did a really good job of making a user-friendly website that separates policies that are governance-driven and fall into one of those 4 buckets, and what they call superintendent circulars, which are really policies that are within the superintendent's managerial control. It's a beautiful website, and it's super user-friendly. And I shared it with Tyrell, and I know he's looked at it a bit, and were you involved in, I know that they work with the council, is that something that you've seen or been able to focus on much? Because it's a pretty nice, unusual setup, I would say.
Yeah, I didn't work with us specifically on that project, but we definitely worked with them on establishing goals, guardrails, and then trying to think about what are these 4 areas of policy and how are those captured and how are those communicated. And then somebody on their team just went the extra mile saying, hey, let's make it beautiful.
So it's pretty common that, I just wanna be clear that the board just creates a whole new manual, and we're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that feels less
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah, and again, the board is accountable for 100% of what happens in the school system. The board is accountable for everything. The third grader stubs their toe next week, you're accountable for it. That's just the way it works. If you don't like being accountable for everything, don't run for the school board. The school board is accountable for everything, but the school board is responsible for very little. If a third grader stubs their toe on the playground next week, is the board responsible for that?
No.
No, why not?
Because we're accountable, but we're not responsible.
You're definitely accountable for it. You're not responsible. Why is the board not responsible for that?
Because we delegated that.
Because that's something you delegate. And so the board delegated supervision of third graders to the superintendent. If a third grader stubs their toe tomorrow, is the superintendent responsible for that?
Administrators at the school,
Why isn't the superintendent responsible? You delegate it to the superintendent.
because they probably delegated it to the administration.
Exactly. They delegate it on to the principal delegated it to the teacher. And so responsibility lies essentially with the person at the end of the chain. The responsibility lies with the person who is actually doing the work. Whoever is doing the thing, they're the responsible party. But everybody else along the chain who delegated their authority to that person is still accountable for it. The principal is still accountable, the superintendent is still accountable, the board is still accountable. It's just not responsible. There's a difference between accountability and responsibility. And your handling of policy needs to be informed by this distinction. The board is accountable for everything, but you are responsible for relatively little. And the things that you're responsible for are the things that you've chosen to be responsible for. The superintendent can't take your authority away. You can choose, here are the areas where we're going to own this and we will be responsible. And here are things where we're going to delegate this and you will be responsible. The board has that authority to make that call. Other reflections, this idea of the goals, guardrails, delegation, and governance. Other reflections before I transition.
AJ, where will, I'm looking at like the policy manual, where will like the school closing and consolidation, like that kind of policy lie? Would that lie under the administration's scope or the board's?
So the short answer, 100% of the time when this question comes up will be, depending on what the board decides. If the board decides that that is something that the board wants to express ownership of, then the board is welcome to do so. We generally refer to those as guardrails. If the board does not want to express ownership of it, then by definition, the board is delegated. That is what we're doing. So whatever the board chooses to delegate, it is giving up ownership of. Whatever the board chooses not to delegate, the board says we're going to be responsible for, we're going to own. And so if the board says to itself, you know what, we're going to own, let me think of something ridiculous. Trash can emptying. We're going to own that. We're not going to delegate trash can emptying to the superintendent. We own that. That means board members, we will physically, the 10 of us will go around and we will empty all the trash cans in the district every week. Because we're not delegating that to the superintendent. We're going to choose to own that. That's what ownership is. And you're the one who's responsible for going out and doing the work. And so if the board wants to own, trash can emptying, the board can certainly choose to own that. and then carve that out and say, this is not what the superintendent owns, this is what we own. Obviously, we would consider this ridiculous for a variety of reasons. But it is certainly within the authority of the board to make that decision for itself.
Thank you.
Another question about goals, guardrails, delegation, governance. This is a lot to take in one, which is why you have the document in front of you, so you can go back and read it at your leisure. Other questions about this idea of the board's area of expertise, in these 4 areas of policy: goals, guardrails, delegation, governance. Other questions before we transition, or reflections?
Have you ever helped a district where we delegate something and they don't wanna do it? How do we deal with, not saying, our district would do that, but I'm interested to hear.
I'll give you 2 stories. The second one being a little bit on the extreme side, which is why I normally don't share it. But the first story is the superintendent doesn't get to choose what is delegated to them or not. They get to choose whether they want to be in the seat. In terms of superintendent, they don't get to choose what's in the job description. That's the job of the board. And so, plain and simple, if you have an employee who's like, well, I understand that's the policy of the board, but I'm not going to enforce that. What they've really said is, I am tendering my resignation.
Okay.
I'm translating for you. Like if you went to your boss and said, hey, I need this paycheck, but I ain't coming into work no more. Your boss would hear that, they would translate it to, I resign, and they would behave accordingly. So that is the challenges that, yes, you certainly have staff like, I decline, but that is the same as, a letter of resignation. So that's the first part of this. The second part is sometimes superintendent will decline. I actually had that happen once. We went through a right-sizing effort and it resulted in us closing a bunch of schools. And we said as superintendent, well, somebody has to go out into the community and have conversations with the community about how this facility could be reused, and that's not really us thing, that's probably needs to be a youth thing. The superintendent flat out refused and said, I got kids to educate, I don't have time to fool that. So if y'all want that done, then y'all need to leave me out of that. And so we did. So we actually hired, totally unprecedented, I strongly don't recommend it, but the superintendent was so adamant that he refused to be involved with these surplus properties. That we actually went to City Hall and hired away a city planner to head our Department of Repurposing. He was basically there just for, I think, 3 years to help identify what the community's voice was around each of the properties, and then help actually implement the community's wishes in each of those properties. And then moved on to whatever the next job in her career was, but just was with the district for that brief amount of time. But before that, the superintendent was like, I want to be responsible for her. I don't want to monitor her. I don't want to evaluate her. Like, this is taken away from my time. I need to be in the classroom supporting instruction. So I just refused. And so our options were fire the superintendent or have one more direct report for 3 years. And so we really liked the superintendent. The fact that he was telling us no because he wanted to focus on instruction, we thought was a great reason to say no. And so we and to have her as a direct report for a brief while. And so that is, like I said, it's an extreme example, but sometimes it does happen.
I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around how much power we hold. We really do hold a lot of power. I don't know.
Yeah, the correct answer is you hold all of it. You really do hold all of it. And then you have to decide which pieces are we giving up that we're delegating, somebody else will have ownership of, and which pieces are we holding that we are delegating to ourselves that we will be responsible for. That is a tough question. Which pieces will we hold on to, which pieces will we delegate, will we only the board can answer that question. That is absolutely a critical question of school board leadership, is how much of this thing do we choose to own? And if we choose to own it, that's fine, but remember, there are rules of ownership. The rules of ownership is that we've got to monitor it at least once a year. We've got to actually sit down and do the work of reviewing it at least once every 3 years. And if we're willing to do that, then we're willing to do the necessary preconditions of ownership. If we're not willing to do that, then we need to delegate.
And can I ask one more question? Because that is the part that I do wonder about. So in that example of like hiring a city planner, essentially, right? Was that an example of the board owning like a policy or process around school buildings, but then it's not so much that the school board went out and had community listening sessions about the schools, but they delegated that to an FTE to help them with that? Is that?
And she went out and did this, right?
Yeah, is that's like a way to own something, but not actually be the person doing it, but you still have to manage the person doing it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And again, the only reason that happens is because the superintendent declines, I'm going to do this. So if you have a superintendent say, hey, we need to teach kids how to read, the superintendent's like, yeah, no, I'm not about that life. Then your options are find a new superintendent or come up with a different plan. In our case, we came up with a different plan. But like 9.9 times out of 10, the superintendent says, no, educating children is not my job. Like, they gotta go. Like, we just got the wrong person.
I guess, that's helpful. I guess I'm trying to think about how to communicate, which I know they'll be on board with, but like fellow board members and just others around the responsibilities of ownership, where I think we get pressure as like board members to like own like this idea of like quantity, like, oh, you should own like it all, but like you can't want to own a garden and then like not tend to it. So I'm just trying to think about ways to get folks to understand the like degrees of ownership. You know what I mean?
When people are saying that, they don't actually want you to own everything. They want you to make the decision that they want you to make on the items they want you to make it on.
Right.
That's what's actually happening. They don't give a damn. They don't care about anything. What they care about is, I want this decision made. I don't have juice with the superintendent, or I would have just gone to them. I do have juice with these board members. Let me just go use the juice I got to get the thing I want done. And that's it. They're not thinking about effective governance practice. They're not thinking about the school system. They're not thinking about any of that. There's something they want done. They've had some challenges in getting it done. And so now they're coming to you to short circuit and do it for those challenges. We completely understand the desire. That's just not how we would ever coach and operate. All right, Cindy, what am I missing before we transition into the mechanics of policy guide? Anything I'm missing?
I don't think you did. I don't think you've missed anything. I think we've gone through all the sections.
All right, Cindy, you want to talk about policy guide? Or you want me to keep going?
Yeah, so, get to the right page here.
AJ, quick question as Sydney finds the policy diet. What is the typical process for if board members wanted to, if board members wanted to like introduce a policy or introduce a resolution, and where do resolutions also lie as well pertaining to like the policies?
So first, let's get some terminology together here. When we think of resolutions, what we're normally talking about are statements that are not binding in any way. So let's have a resolution in favor of spaghetti month. And this is, September is official spaghetti month. Everybody loves Spaghetti, put your hand in the air, wiggle like you just don't care. That when we think resolutions, that's what we're talking about. Is that what you all do with resolutions?
Yep.
There's nothing binding, it's just a rah-rah feel-good situation.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah, those.
I can't hear you.
You broke up.
Absolutely hate those.
Okay.
You hate those?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I literally had this conversation last week with another board on the West Coast. They had on their agenda a recognition of foster care, foster child month. They had this whole whereas foster children in foster care are deserving of our love and support and kindness and all these other things and this, that, and the third, and whereas foster kids are people too, and yeah, whatever foolishness was in the set. Here's what it didn't say. Hey, our foster kids are getting screwed over by our school system right now and are dramatically behind everybody else. And damn it, here's what we're gonna do to fix that. Didn't say anything about that. Just said, let's celebrate Foster Kid Awareness Month. As a former foster kid who was in foster care from birth, literally left the hospital and went into foster care. As a child who aged out of foster care. As a child as someone who's been a foster parent for 5 children. I frankly was essentially insulted that a bunch of public officials are kind of pimping the name of foster children to get good vibes, on social media, but not actually doing anything to address the needs of foster care children. Nowhere in that resolution was, here's how foster children are going to be, we're going to make good on the promise we owe them. No, it's just, hey, we care about foster children. Well, don't tell me, show me. And so this is my fundamental problem with resolutions, is it tends to be a bunch of political posturing, a bunch of, let me pivot and show people how much I care about stuff without actually doing anything, without actually experiencing the pain of making choices of saying, we're going to divert money from this thing that everybody likes so that we can actually take care of foster kids for the first time ever in the history of the school district. We ain't going to do that. We're just going to get some good shine and some good publicity because we love foster kids without actually serving them any better than we ever did. And so no, I think boards should spend their time in resolutions of this, the virtue signaling performative resolutions aren't actually serving children, they're serving themselves. This is political chicanery of the highest order. It's designed to benefit adults, it's not designed to benefit children. And so I'm fundamentally opposed to this use of resolutions. Don't tell me you care about something, show me you care about something with action. In that regard, then yeah, I'd say somebody bring forth, here's the action. Hey, superintendent, I noticed that our foster kids are significantly far behind. Board, I noticed we haven't actually done anything about it. Can we, when we go to adopt our goals, can one of our goals be about our foster kids and what we're doing to actually create justice for them? Okay, now we're actually talking about putting resources behind the thing, but just having a big brouhaha, yay, because we want to feel good, like that helps adults. That doesn't help kids. And so we would say, don't do that. We'd say if people actually want to celebrate foster kids, then come forward with some type of action that is going to disproportionately address the needs of foster kids. Hey, we're going to have one of our goals be about foster kids. We're going to have one of our guardrails be about foster kids. The superintendent won't allow foster students to be without similar set of resources their non-foster peers have. Okay, great. So now we've got to make sure that foster kids actually have access to the same thing. I grew up with foster care. Like every year, here's a treatment for kids who didn't live in the group home, and then here's a treatment for the kids who did. All right, so let's pass something that says we're going to even that out. That would be meaningful. But just saying rah rah rah, we like foster kids this month, miss me with all of that.
And lastly, what is the typical process for if board members wanted to, say, introduce a policy? Like how would you sort of phrase that?
Yeah, the first thing I check to see is which area of expertise, which area of board expertise is this related to? It's related to goals, or related to guardrails, or related to delegation, or related to governing. So that's the first thing I check. So in this hypothetical situation, which area of the board's expertise is it related to?
And I think something else that you said was really important. When we make policies and around these things, they need resources. So you're also needing to have the conversation and discussion about if this policy or this decision requires resources and we only have this many resources, what are we diverting? What are we changing? What are we prioritizing in order to be able to do that? And I think that's one of the critical pieces, because we can make a decision and we can make a policy, but if we don't also make the decision about what to do with the resources, the policy can't really go anywhere.
Yeah, board members whine. Board members whine incessantly and justifiably. Board members whine incessantly and justifiably about unfunded mandates from the state legislature. State legislature got all kinds of, hey, let's have a law that says school districts have to do A, B, and C. Are we gonna give them money to do A, B, and C? Hell no, we're just gonna tell them they gotta do A, B, and C. Board members whine incessantly about this, and justifiably, because it completely hampers the board's ability to do its job and hampers the school system's ability to do its job. All these unfunded mandates, where somebody thought it was a great idea, so they passed it so they could score some political points. But this is just, aura farming. Like, we just getting, vibes out here. Hey, guess what, TikTok? I passed this law. Nobody has the money to afford to implement it, but hey, I passed this law. In the same way that boards are annoyed with administration, when state legislators behave that way, the board should avoid behaving that way itself. Say, oh, well, wait a minute, this is an area that I care deeply about. Yes, I'd like to see something happen here. What am I willing to take off the plate of the superintendent to put this on? What am I willing to say we're definitively going to stop doing? The stopping of which will save us all of these resources. The doing of which will allow us to engage in doing X, Y, and Z. If that's the conversation you're gonna have, great, that's a great conversation. That's just never the conversation. The conversation is always add, and never what are we subtracting to actually empower the addition.
Thank you.
So all of that suggests that policy is incredibly powerful. And the board can have policy about whatever it wants to have policy about, as long as it's areas that it's willing to really own that particular area. If it's willing to exert ownership, great. But if it's the area the board isn't on, or the area the board's already delegated to the superintendent or someone else, then let them do it. That is the underlying takeaway from this whole section. Is the board has expertise. Use that expertise. And anywhere that's outside of your expertise, find somebody who has expertise and either delegate it to them or delegate the drafting of it to them, so that you have a way of benefiting from their expertise. The other reflections on this section, yeah.
I have a follow-up question on Paula's remark, because I'm not sure I fully get the point of agreement. If the policies that we're talking about as board-owned are really policies that capture the goals and guardrails of the community, then I'm not seeing those policies as having, and maybe I need a specific example, having specific financial mandates attached to them.
Oh, I can give you like an example. So, for example, if we decide, if the board decides that are the community listening sessions, there's a drive to increase the number of dual and bilingual programs. There's a real and specific cost to that.
Yep.
And so if we have $3 million for programs,
then we have to make a decision that X percentage of that 3 million goes to this particular thing, which means we can't fund this other thing that we have been funding. So that's what I mean, right?
Really turning our dials up and down on.
Exactly.
Are they in alignment with the vision? I think about this with like art, right? Like I know when I first got on the board, there were a fair amount of people who were like, oh yeah, like aren't you, like you're the art person, like aren't you gonna like do a resolution about art? I'm like for what? First of all, it's dope. You know what I mean? Like it's just like it's this thing, it's like a political stunt for like campaigning essentially for board members, but then also I think Dr. Dillon, you were one of the people I feel like I learned, I don't remember what the specifics were, but just around it's not just about like, yeah, I mean I would love it, we would love it if there was like art all day, like at school. But there's also like regulation and like criteria and seat time that we need for specific subjects and like standards and like it's not as simple as just saying, oh, everything you're gonna get, 3 periods of art every day because the board said so. It's like there's a lot of like money that goes into that. There's like actual conversations. There's like potentially like laws that gotta get changed.
Yeah, and so for example, if we wanted to do more art, but we had to have these number of instructional minutes by law for these other things, it might mean that you have to add a half an hour to the school day, which means you have to pay teachers a little bit more money, right? So that's what I'm talking about.
If it's student outcome driven, you're still talking about inputs. So if it's an output driven process and the goal is to, the goal would have to be improving the performance of students in a particular part of the community around art, that isn't necessarily tagging a particular dollar amount. Because what the board is saying is we want to have improved performance in this particular area. It may implicate more money. I'm not disagreeing that there's a financial price tag on everything that's being done. I'm just trying to link the outcome-driven goals with a fiscal impact statement.
And there isn't always, but I think that what I'm saying is it has to be a part of the conversation. If we're going to make a policy that prioritizes something, it could be time resources, it could be money resources. How are we doing that, right? We have to have the full conversation because although we would love to do everything, if we're constantly doing everything, we're not getting tight and good on the things that are connected to the outcome. So we have to have the full conversation. What does this mean for time? What does this mean for personnel? What does this mean for budget? And it might not, but it might.
And isn't that a part of the conversation that Cindy described in our meeting as being the administrative input into what goals and guardrails the board is setting? So when they do that drafting and they start communicating the community listening sessions, then the administration has an opportunity to look at those particular goals and say, okay, that's great, but this is where the budget impact is going to be and this is where the financial impact. I'm just trying to kind of identify where the rubber meets the road at what point in the process.
And it will meet the rubber will meet the road to some degree early in the process when the staff, when the superintendent and cabinet are determining what that target percent can be, what that ending point can be for the goal. Because what we want, we want a small amount of goals, 1 to 5, recommend 3, and we want them to challenge the organization, yet be challenge adult behavior change, yet be achievable, or which creates attention in and of itself. And typically, if the board, if the target is going to be set at a challenging level, that is going to often require change somewhere by way of time, talent, treasure in order to be able to achieve that goal. There's going to be, and which means that there would be a change of time, talent, and treasure in other aspects that are not part of the goals and guardrails. But setting that target rate is going to depend on that. If we set it high here, it's gonna need to be lower somewhere else, in order to shift that around. Go ahead, AJ, sorry.
Yeah, related to this, one of the things that you'll see, in the SOG guide, the Student Outcomes Focused Governance Manual provided to you, is part of the board self-evaluation is this idea that the first priority for resource allocation, if the board considers adoption of the budget, the board will adopt the budget only if it has concluded the first priority for resource allocation was the goals. And so if you look at the budget, like I can't tell if anything is being additional being put toward the goals or not, if anything additional being put toward the guardrails or not, I can't tell, then we would say don't adopt that budget. Send that budget back to the superintendent, invite them to do their work, and come back to you with a complete. And so this idea that the policy inherently has a fiscal note associated with it is accurate. The three core questions of policy is what benefit for whom and at what cost. And so the idea is that all policy decisions have a dollar amount. That's already a given. Now the only question is, are you being clear about what is the priority for those resources? Are you monitoring to make sure that those resources are being deployed? Are you evaluating and reviewing every now and then to figure out, have we spent money in a way that's conducive to what we intended? But yeah, every single policy, and this is why having thousands of pages of school board policy begins to make it obscure what the priorities are, because you just obligated the system to spend money in 1,000 different ways in order to show that they're following the leadership of the board. Other questions or reflections? Now we can get into the hardcore aspects of it. Other questions or reflections?
And so just one piece to that I have seen be a particular challenge is when it comes down to sending that budget back because it's not reflective enough, then some hard decisions have to be made, right? And so thinking about roles and responsibilities and making those hard decisions, because if sometimes, especially when budgets are tight, it can be coming down to making a financial decision about a program that, although might not be having benefits to student outcomes, might be something that is perceived as a political hot potato to touch, or it might be something that's been here forever, and well, we've always had that, and so why wouldn't we have it now? And so the dialogue between the board and the superintendent around that, okay, this isn't reflecting the goals and guardrails enough, we need changes. And then the next thing is, okay, where are the things that we are going to deprioritize to make those, right?
Yes, and that is, there is a likelihood like that would happen, and possibly before the board even says, we would anticipate that you all might recommend some of those things to happen when you first bring the budget. And the board should anticipate that there are going to be trade-offs and some hard decisions to make there, and we would really recommend that the board hold the line on the prioritization of the goals and guardrails, because you'll hear from parents who love XYZ program because their kid has been in it and it's been great. And there's definitely, that is going to be something that's hard to hear, and you're going to hear it. But the best thing to do is to really maintain, this is the vision, these are the values of the community, this is how we are prioritizing, and just be straight. That'll be important to be upfront with the community when you communicate back about your goals and guardrails, and kind of the changes in how you all do business are going to happen. And that prioritization means prioritizations of resources as well. But that you'll be open, transparent, and public about it, but also have the superintendent's back as far as making those decisions. They're open. I say it from experience, and having sat in the board seat and sat as the chair and have had, people at the podium making comments and crying, because their beloved program is on the chopping block. But that is a hard space that we choose to be in as board members, and we cannot be everything to everybody, but we can be great in making sure that our students have improved outcomes.
Yeah, and it's just like, being on a budget is not just about money, right? It's like priorities have to be on a budget. You know what I mean? Like everything's on a budget. I know when I go to the market, I get $100. And if you're like making a commitment with your family to like, oh, we're gonna eat healthier, like everyone's like, yeah, and then they're like, wait, why didn't you buy the cookies? It's like, because we on a budget, and it's like
I love all of your analogies.
They all come from being a mom, like most of them, but like
and they work. So
it really is. I think that this is gonna be through the feedback session, like you said, with our community. It's an amazing opportunity to educate ourselves, other board members, and community about what it means to be on a budget, and what trade-offs are really about, and like what it means to, anything is possible. Like I believe that anything is possible, but the question is what are we willing to do for it?
Yes.
What are we willing to give up for it? And that's where, to your point, Dr. Dillon, where a lot of people stop.
Yes.
It's very easy to say we want free cookies for everyone. You know what I mean? But it's like, okay, so then like, are we willing to like not have free bus passes for students or something? But you know what I mean? Or are we willing to like, it's that part of the conversation that we have to get keen about and be disciplined about having the other half of the conversation.
And it gets really, I'll just share our perspective. It gets really complicated for administration when we think we're on the same page, and then we have the budget and we're all good, and then a voice comes in that says something else, and all of a sudden now we have to pivot, and it's very, very challenging to do that. So just from the perspective of like when we're tight, it's a lot easier, even though it's hard to hear that loud voice. And if that loud voice isn't in service of the goals and guardrails that you've established, then it could be challenging, but it's much better for the students when we stay tight to the goals and guardrails and we stay tight together.
And we have guidance documents and guidance that we can provide as you do review budget around this as well.
Well, that leaves us with, we've talked about kind of policy leadership. what that looks like, what that doesn't look like. And again, this document needs to be provided to the full board so they can be thinking about some of these topics in advance of having a similar conversation with the full board. But what that leaves us with is just the technical details of what does a policy diet process look like. And so I want to walk through that briefly. So is that something you want to walk us through? You want me to?
I can do it.
Have fun.
All right. Okay, so policy diet, yeah, and this is all the mechanics of actually going through all of the policies that you have on the books. So what you do first is that you will actually sort through all of the policies. You would start with a policy review, and that would answer 3 questions. One, is it legally required for the school board to have this policy, or can it be legally delegated to the superintendent? And the second question is the implementation, the work of the board, or the work of the superintendent. So that goes back to the who is the most reasonable owner, who would be the best expert in this. And then the third question, to what extent does this policy directly impact the goals the school board has adopted regarding student outcomes, or the guardrails the school board has adopted regarding the community's values, those non-negotiable guardrails or values, yeah. And then we recommend that this is a 3-pronged approach, like essentially that there would be 3 teams doing this work. And that would be having a school board ad hoc group, or this group, for example, for the governance management question. Your legal people for the legal delegability question. And then a superintendent-led team to address the student outcomes impact. And of course, that is once your student outcome goals and your guardrails are set. Any questions so far?
So the school board ad hoc group looks at the governance policies, the ones that they would look, it would be for each existing policy that are already on the books. Is it policy work for the school board or work for the superintendent? And they're gonna pretty easily be able to. So, for the governance management question, they might rank them. 0 might mean between 0 and 10. 0 might mean that the item is purely management and never involve governance, and a 10 might mean that it's purely governance and would never involve management. So they're all looking at it with the same set of questions. How do we rank these?
Yeah.
They all are looking at the at the delegation and non-delegation.
Yes. Yeah, for every policy that exists.
Miss Cindy, I'm sorry. So each prong, so the school board, the legal counsel, the superintendent is looking at it to see? No, they're just.
Yeah. No. So for example, imagine a giant spreadsheet with every policy listed on it. And column one is next to column one is this policy, may this policy be legally delegated? And your legal counsel would answer,
Yes, no.
go down the whole list in that column and say yes, no, whatever the answer is.
Yep.
And then the next column is the board committee or the ad hoc or this policy committee. And they're going through and is this a governance or management?
Okay.
And probably in a ranking fashion, you know, like
1 to 10.
0 being,
Okay.
yeah, 0, no, and then there would be a third column, and that would be the superintendent's team who would go through each policy and once you have your goals and rank those based on their impact on student outcomes. So they could use a 0 to 10 scale, 0 meaning that an item has absolutely no impact on the student outcomes, and 10 might mean that it's very directly connected to student outcomes.
Okay, that was helpful, thank you.
So yeah, yep, and like an example for the impact on student outcomes, like a policy about incentivizing highly effective teachers to serve in your neediest school buildings would probably be ranked at a 7 to 10 ranking. And then others might rank 0 to 3, like who is going to be sitting on a policy about who can sit on various task forces for the superintendent outside of the school district. I don't know. Would be a low impact.
Thank you, I have another question, Ms. Cindy.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
I know we talked about, the board just creating its own manual with policies. Now, do we do
Yep.
this diet to the existing manual that's 1,000 pages, or we do this diet once the board has pulled the policies that, you know, fall into our 4 buckets?
So the first 2 buckets, you're going to be starting that process on the 4th of October.
Yep.
The delegation, some of the delegation, and I'm not sure because I haven't read all of your policies. I'm not sure if some of the delegation, there might be some delegation and governing policies
there are.
scattered. Go ahead, yeah. Thanks, AJ. That you would pull out into your governance manual.
Okay, so,
And then everything else, it's a matter of, everything else is all the existing policies and making that decision, does the board want to own it or not? And if they have to own it because they can't delegate it, then they have to own it, and that question's answered by legal. But if they can, if the board can delegate it and it's one that that you don't want to touch and believe that it belongs solely with the superintendent as far as responsibility, then you can push that to delegation, as delegated to the superintendent.
okay, so we're doing the diet to the existing manual, that's what it sounds like. Okay, thank you.
Yes, yep,
We
you
can,
bet.
we can in theory, start that as the goals and guardrails being developed, because it's already existing stuff that it's gonna take us time to go through it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And
Yeah, and so, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, and I was gonna say, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead a little bit, can can that be this policy committee, and then is that something that, once we have like a proposal or suggestions, do we like bring that to the board to like vote on? Like, for instance,
Yes,
like.
yeah, once you go through that whole process, yep, then you'd bring the recommendations to the board to vote on, and, everything that, and then, yeah, then that would take care of it. But you all could do the big lift of going through and then bringing all the findings to the board.
Do you guys have, and it's no worries if you don't, because I can already see it, do you guys have a policy diet template or rubric, or is that something you just make?
It is something that, you could probably pretty easily make. We maybe have I know I have seen templates before, but it's pretty.
Yeah, we have some, so we won't leave you all out to dry.
Yeah.
It sounds like just like an Excel sheet, or like a Google sheet. Like columns and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And we can definitely show you what we have. But yeah, and so once, yeah.
We're sorry, Cindy, we just realized that, yeah, there are.
No, go ahead.
There's already a sheet, the PPSD team, like, there's already a group who's been working on the policies and ranking them, and, you know, so it might just be.
Oh, wow.
Group, so,
It's an Excel spreadsheet.
yeah, yeah.
Just add the
Yeah.
columns to
Yeah.
each of the groups.
Yeah, you could add like the ranking.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Required by
Yep.
the law.
Exactly.
It
Yeah,
doesn't.
and then that-
It doesn't separate based upon the criteria you've described.
No, but you
So
should
just
add
add
those
the
columns.
columns at the end. So your column, you would go there and then you go
Right.
down, yes, no, yes, no, yes.
I think you'd have to recreate the columns, because the columns now reflect who's the person who has the policy.
Yeah, it would
And
need
there's
to be edited, but it's
yeah,
a good starting point.
It's a good starting point, because it lists all the policies that exist. I think there are 115.
That's-
Is there a column? Is there a column for like recommendation to delete, or is that just something that we would just wait?
We would add that.
We would add that it's obsolete, like we could add a column that it's too old to worry about.
And 115
Yeah,
is
and-
actually not the
Oh,
worst.
that's
actually.
not that many.
I mean, that's what I counted very quickly from your spreadsheet, Paula. It looked like about 115.
I mean, it's too many, but it's not as bad as I've
But
seen.
I don't know if that was complete. I mean, my county may not have been accurate. It was not, it looked doable.
So I'm actually fairly impressed, because 115 is low as compared to a lot of
Yeah.
other districts who have
Yeah.
just pages and pages. So this,
Doable.
and that's amazing, right? It's amazing that you already have it all in a spreadsheet form already, so you're,
Did
You
you
got a
have
lot
all of them,
of-
or was that partial?
No, that's all, but, yeah. the previous-
But it also references all those regulations, so you have to.
Right, there's a lot of cleaning, I'm not saying that there
Oh.
isn't, but we have a good starting
Yes.
point.
Should we have a column for like recommendation to delete, or should we just sort of
Yes.
consolidate really quick?
So-
Really quick, or should we consolidate them first and then allow the groups to say, okay, this is too old?
I think 1971 is too old. You don't need like, that's like really old.
Go ahead, Sydney.
I can tell you in the
So I
legal
think-
review that it's obsolete.
Go ahead, Sydney.
Yeah, I would say that if there is, if there are things that you already know are obsolete and not relevant anymore, which I think you had talked about some of those yesterday, that you could definitely indicate which ones those are. And then, that's a big lift, is to go through those three groups, going through each policy and doing that with that ranking for the superintendent and board teams, and then the yes, no for the legal team. But then, once you've got all of that done, then your next step would be to identify all the policies that can be delegated and that have a score in those rankings that would indicate that the board is happy with delegating them. You know, you would put a threshold on what that might be. You might say anything from 0 to 5 rating is going to, we'll automatically delegate those if they can be delegated, and then just go ahead and delegate those. And then everything that remains, you would go through those, and then there would be 4 buckets that you would sort those remaining policies into. The first one into the board, what meets the criteria for board policies, the goals, guardrails, delegating, or governing. Second is to hand it over to the superintendent for potential inclusion in administrative policy and procedure. Third, you could delete it from the board's policy manual and hand it over for mandatory inclusion into the administrative policy and procedure manual. And then fourth, you could add it to a legacy list when you're required legally to retain policies that you would have otherwise deleted. So those things that you have to do by law, you know, so you would have a legacy list at the end of your board policy manual so that you can keep track of the policies that you're legally required to have and to keep track of.
The way that I've done it with other school boards is that on the consent agenda, all of those archived policies would be placed on a consent agenda, listed, and then that way there's public notice that they've been archived.
Yep.
But wait a minute, legacy is not the same
But
as
Archived.
Yeah, that's, yes, those would be the ones that you're deleting and no longer using, right?
Oh, right.
But
okay.
the legacy lists are the ones that need to be kept, but don't necessarily fit into the,
Right, they're not archived.
So the archive are the ones I was talking
They're
about.
not.
Yeah, that's like the obsolete
Yeah.
ones, but.
but the ones that the board has to keep, has to have on the books, but they don't fall into the governing policy. But the board has a list of what those policies are so that they know that they need to be updating, approving, whatever as required by law.
And Michelle, I just emailed you another document. If you want to pull up your email right quick, at the end of that, the whole document describes what Cindy just walked you through. At the end of that document, however, is a genius flow chart that Cindy put together that I've always found is the easiest way to think about that. And so you might share that flow chart.
Yep, doing it now. Thank you.
Yeah, it will make more sense than that. The visual will be helpful.
No, that was really great explanation. Thank you, Ms.
You bet.
Cindy. Really helpful.
So what questions do you have
So
about this
would it make
piece
sense,
of the process?
would it make sense, Miss Cindy, like in our next policy meeting to like do breakout groups, like the superintendent's team goes to one side, the policy committee comes to one side, Sarah's a one-man army, so she can be on no one.
Nobody in my group? That's not fair.
But like, or maybe President Stevens can join you, but like, and then like together,
No,
just
he's
do
not.
that work, like in like workshop style, and then by the end, we can come together and kind of like, it seems like, or does it seem like we should do that in silos, like on our own, and then come back to the meeting with our?
I think that sounds like it could be a very workable idea. And then that way, if you already have the time set aside for one thing, right? And then, if you're working in your groups and questions come up or what have you, you can bounce, thought partner with your other teams in the policy committee.
Yeah,
So I think that is a workable idea. AJ, do you have different?
I was actually saying, I'm thinking, I like that, I've not seen it done that way before, but I'm game, let's do it.
Yeah.
It'll take a couple of sessions.
it might take a couple, but.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
And some food. Yeah, I'm wondering about like what, just like what our timeline is gonna be as a policy committee, like when do we wanna have this sort of concluded in like a draft of the board, like is this something that we wanna have?
Well, and part of your challenge is that there's only so far you can get prior to having goals and guardrails in hand.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering, is this something we wanna try to have done by December, along with the goals and guardrails, so that way we're working on a timeline. Also just seasonally, you know what I mean, I think having a goal for the season makes sense. I've been on policy too for the last year and a half, and it has felt arbitrary at best, you know what I mean, with no real clear focus. And I think having like a fall project that coincides with the goals and guardrails, that way we're starting off January with goals and guardrails, a transition plan, and a policy manual, that makes sense.
Yep.
That will get us in the right momentum, you know.
We have, what, 3 months from now, in October, December,
Yeah.
policy, so we can kind of.
Yeah, it's a
Divide
There's some work you can start before the board goals and guardrails. I think you can start contemplating what can be delegated and what can't, and what's legally required and what isn't. That's doable in advance, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Share out.
Yeah, and I think we can do that as a collective, even going through, maybe not necessarily separating into groups, but sitting down as a group with a spreadsheet in front of us and starting to talk through, I can come prepared, so I have some idea about what the law is, but I think we can work through some of that before
Right.
October 4th.
Yeah, and talk through like, almost like, do like at home work on the rating, and then we can talk through our ratings when we come
Yeah.
there. So if I rate something out of 1 and you rate it out of 10, we're gonna need to have a discussion about.
I mean, that's you guys, but I mean, we can do
Right.
homework to get ready for it.
Exactly.
And if maybe Paula, we can get a clean Excel that has sort of new criteria that we're gonna be evaluating,
And I can make that. I don't,
or whoever.
yeah, I don't mind. I feel like it's just easy. I have access to that one, and I know what the columns should be.
Yeah.
So I don't mind.
Yeah, just fine.
And then circulate it and then set up a meeting, a couple work sessions maybe one in advance of October 4th, so that we kind of you go into that with some already first cut of what could be. And you can start to have these conversations about delegation with this training before October 4th, because some of it's gonna be really obvious.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Clearly can be delegated, and
And it wouldn't be a quorum if like 3-4 members got together, right?
well, I don't see, you have a group of, I think, we kind of became.
No, if you talk about the pre-homework, and if we wanted to speak about, like, if we wanted to get together as 3 members, that wouldn't be a quorum, is that
It
correct?
could turn into a
Yes.
going forum.
You should do it as 2, because you've got 3 board members on this, right? I mean, Heidi isn't here, but you're gonna either be it or have some other person, so you've gotta do
Okay,
your.
well, I can stay out of it. I'll stay here. I'm staying out of it, all right?
You can come to the meeting.
Yeah, I'll stay out of them 2 meetings. together to talk about it.
So I think, yeah, 'cause Heidi is out, so I don't know if anyone even knows that, I'm gonna be like interim chair policy.
But is there gonna be a
It's gone.
replacement for Heidi, is there gonna be a third person, or is it just?
It may
I think
be, I don't
it's-
know, it may just be me. It may just be
You're back.
me.
I know Cindy and AJ is still here, so maybe we should, we could work on this one.
Yeah, no, and I did find a spreadsheet that I'm happy to share. And you guys can decide if you wanna use it or not. So I'll go ahead and email that when I sign off here.
Cindy, one last thing.
Are there
too.
any other questions for us while we're
Cindy,
still on?
can you just explain the difference between policies and bylaws?
Oh, good question.
So here's my thinking on bylaws versus policies. Bylaws, in my mind, are the same thing as essentially serve the same purpose as the governing and delegation policies. It's just a different name for them, because typically your governing policy, which is around the relationship the board has with itself, with the community, that, it's around a code of conduct, around conflict of interest, around all of those types of things, which essentially is typically what's in board bylaws. AJ, do you have a different way of describing that?
No, that's exactly it. It's just called different things in different places. And we can preserve language that people are familiar with if it's meaningful, or if it's easier to help people adopt different language, and whatever helps bring people into coherence, we're happy to do. But yeah, in you all's context, what you all think of as bylaws is generally what we think of as governing and delegation policy.
So for the policy diet, I know the spreadsheet that exists with the PTSD policies is about 115 of them. So that means we should probably also be looking at our bylaws at the same time, on the same document. I don't know if you guys have any suggestions about how to make sure we're not, missing the bylaws as we're going through them.
In previous
Well,
districts,
it's
they were
possible.
policy, right? So it's the
Yeah, it's
governing policy.
possible that you might end up with is I don't know this to be certain, but it's possible what you might end up with is it turns out all of your bylaws are just governance and delegation related. Then it might be that be the document that becomes the new purely governance document. You add into it your goals, you add into it your guardrails, you add into it anything that's currently in the other policy manual that actually belongs in the bylaws. You take anything that's in the bylaws that actually belongs in the other policy manual, put it there, and then that might be done. So, let Cindy and I take a look at your bylaws, because you all may already have a segregation in place that actually puts you ahead of most other districts.
Okay.
Do you have, so if you can send us a clean copy or point us to where they are on your website, because I don't easily see them when I click on the board and district policy link, I don't.
If you click on it and you go under governance, it'll sit right on, it'll be like the first tab, which says bylaws.
Let me see why I can't find that.
AJ, while Miss Cindy's looking for that, we just had our interviews, are you redoing our bylaws?
We have some recommendations for some modifications, some upgrades,
Okay.
based on what we've heard from you all. We will have some, recommendations at that time. We will be able to do some early cleaning that will help speed some of this up as well.
Okay.
Can you, Cindy, AJ, can you tell me if this makes sense for next steps? I wanna make sure, I think one of the biggest issues anyways that I've experienced on policy is that a lot of times we leave and then there's not follow-up around what the homework is, or and then we end up back here like a month or so, and they're like, what you know what I mean? Like, so I just wanna make sure we're clear,
Yeah.
so.
We can send a follow-up email,
Okay.
to y'all and say, here are the next steps. Here are the list of steps generally from where we are today to, a complete review of all of your policies, bylaws, everything. And based on all of that, here's what the immediate next steps are. We can put that email together and send it out. Just as a reminder, one immediate next step is that your next meeting is we'll actually just turn it into a workshop and start digging into the spreadsheet that Cindy shared.
Yep. Sounds good.
And I don't know, Tyrell, do you think we should have a workshop before October 4th? That's one question. Because
For early enough in the month too.
yeah, it's not even, tomorrow's the 4th. I think if we do a mid-month meeting where we get the ball rolling, we can get a lot accomplished. I would suggest that.
I'll hustle all the time. Well, I think we've got our marching orders. We'll get that. We'll put our heads together, put together a little timeline for just this one particular project, the full policy bylaws review, and what the exact next steps in that are. And so Cindy and I will get that to you, hopefully by end of business tomorrow. But then we'll all come prepared to just roll up sleeves and go to work. The next one.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Drive your rented car home carefully.
Right, exactly. Yeah, y'all take it easy. I just love all the hustle. I love the grind. Y'all just have been consistently my inspiration lately. And so I just really appreciate it. I love that you all are taking it back out to the community to collect voices that you didn't hear. Like just the intentionality that you all bring in is just, it's just giving me all kind of life. And I appreciate y'all.
And AJ, I sent you an email. Please respond to it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Do this.
Oh, do we need to do this? Okay.
Can you do it? You don't have a forum on the state website.
No, we do.
3, 5 minutes? I think for policy.
4 out of 4, yeah.
Oh, for policy committee, sorry.
Right, yeah, sorry for this meeting.
Oh,
So this day is,
all
Been
the-
a long
Absolutely.
order.
Absolutely.
Okay,
She got a call.
I'm gonna call it to order.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna call this policy committee meeting to order today on September 3rd, 2025. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move. Second.
Motion, made by Secretary Fonts, second made by President Stevens. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Say it really quick, man. You're all in favor. Say aye.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We already did policy and plan and training, so now we can adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you.
That's so weird, but okay, sure. Thank you so much.
I mean, it was very unusual.
Thank you all
It
so
worked.
much. AJ's gonna send the next steps.
But I suggested a meeting mid-month in advance of October 4th to do some of that work.
What does mid-month look like?
The 16th.
Middle of
The
September.
17th is
Yeah.
Wednesday.